Hey guys, welcome back to Lounge Chair Reviews. Today we'll be talking about The Drawing of the Three by Stephen King. It is book 2 of 7 in the Dark Tower series, and I am reading the Dark Tower series because it was recommended to me. It is a Western fantasy. I'm going to talk a little bit about book 1 just to give you an intro into the series. Book 1 is extremely dull for most of it, but it's incredibly effective at setting up the world and its parallels with our own. It is not our world, but our world does have a starring role in it. Magic is an important part of the series, and it is used incredibly effectively in the series. There are limitations to it, and there are a vast number of things that can be done with it, and Stephen King is a master novelist for a reason. I haven't read a lot of Stephen King. I attempted to read a couple of his hard novels when I was a kid, and yeah, that didn't go well. But this was recommended to me because my chiropractor realized I read a lot of fantasy, and he said that he's never really gotten into reading or fantasy, but he loved this series, and I promised him I'd give it a shot. And the end of book 1 hooked me, and I only made it through all of book 1 because I swore I'd read it. But if you manage to get through book 1, book 2 pays off. So you have 4 main characters in book 2. You have the gunslinger. He is your protagonist through the entire series, as far as I'm aware. He is trained in the art of shooting guns, but it is more of a religion, and it is incredibly important to him. And The Drawing of the Three centers around him finding 3 magic doors and finding kindred soul that will assist him in his journey to make it to a mythical tower that may or may not exist, that he is not sure where it is or what's going to happen when he gets there, and that is the entire basis for the series. The pros of the second book are, 1, it's an incredibly easy read. It doesn't drag at all. Actually, when you read the first section with the first door, you could or at least I could very easily see it being an entire book, that each of the 3 doors could have very, very easily been their own stories, their own books. And I think that it's to the credit of Stephen King that it's not. That he is able to take 3 ideas that could very, very easily be 3 books, and he turns it into a deftly woven story that just captivates really from the first moment it starts. It picks back up pretty close after book 1 ends. I want to say right after book 1 ends, but I'm not 100% sure. And the primary second character in the entire series, other than the ghosts haunting the gunslinger, and not literal ghosts, by the way, I just mean, memories. But the primary secondary character in the book is the antagonist of this particular book, not of the series. There are a couple overarching villains that you've seen hints of, and I'm only really taking a guess at that. I could completely be wrong, actually. So as much as I'm trying to keep this spoiler free, at the same time, I can't ruin much other than, the specific plot points of this book, because I don't know. I haven't read synopsis. I haven't been spoiled for it, which is weird because it came out a while ago. So as I said, it's deftly woven, and it threads the stories together rather well, and the adventure it takes you on is simultaneously its own story and part of a larger whole, and it's really hard to do that. So there's a lot of pros to this book, and there's not many cons. The main con is that the story at times becomes predictable. But I think the reason for this is because it had to become predictable to move the story forward. There is a reason why certain things are predictable in life, is because we have an understanding of human nature and events, and therefore stories will sometimes have the same predictability of life, and this book does. It hits a very predictable point, and it could have easily fallen into any one of the numerous ways to resolve it, but instead it continues to challenge the main characters, and it ultimately drives the story forward with a resolution that is both predictable but not. I feel that it could have surprised plenty of readers, but at the same time, plenty of readers could have guessed it. It's not really a twist ending for the resolution of that one specific plot point, but it does become predictable. And some people are very put off by predictable, especially in fantasy. So that is a con, but I don't think it's to the detriment of the novel as a whole. So that's really the end of my spoiler-free section of the review. The rest of it is going to talk primarily about spoiler events and primarily the reason why it becomes predictable, but also reasons why I love the book. My overall recommendation for those of you that aren't going to watch the spoiler section is read it. The first book will drag. It will be a bit of a chore to get through. I definitely whined my way through part of it. The only reason why I didn't put it down and walk away was because I had promised someone I'd read it. But the payoff at the end of the first book is really quite awesome, or at least I loved it and was not expecting it. And 2, you have the second book, and the second book is absolutely worth a read. It's worth a read if you like Westerns, which I have nothing against, but I don't seek them out and don't watch them or like them. And a great read if you're into fantasy that is not your run-of-the-mill high fantasy that involves Lord of the Rings. Basically, Stephen King set out to create a high fantasy series that was as epic in scale as Lord of the Rings, but at the same time extremely accessible. And this is accessible. I don't know if he set out to make it accessible, but it is absolutely accessible. And he does it with a really great mix of gritty realism from our world and rules of magic from high fantasy and ideas that you can find in Westerns. And it works when a lot of people would have failed. And I think that that's a testament to King's writing. Definitely on my best books I read this year. Although I'm not totally sure it'll make the top 10, it is definitely in my top 20. Read this book. Read the series. And I can only hope that the rest of the series is as great as this book was. The major predictable point in the book was when Eddie gave Odetta the gun and you knew she was going to turn into Detta and she was going to try to kill them. Because that's so set up. What else was she about to do? There's just nothing. So it was great. However, that the resolution of the Odetta Detta actually created a new character. And I really loved the scenes between Odetta and Eddie and Detta and Eddie. I think the reason why this novel works is the dynamics between the characters work. I love the gunslinger's decision to kill the third person, even though it might cause problems with him achieving his goals because of the guilt he feels and the debt he feels toward Jake. And I think that it's worth it. I think that that was a huge payoff that people probably, when the book first came out, were really talking about, because you're not 100% sure exactly what choice he's going to make till he makes it. And I think that that's true for all of us, and I think that right along with him, you're making a decision. And by the way, the whole first section with Eddie, I really thought was going to just be the whole book, and I was looking forward to it. That shootout with the mob, like, it's Stephen King manages to take all of these elements, you know, whether it's our world, like when he, you know, robs the store and whatever, and he's just trying to live in our world and understand it, whether it's that, or King is taking elements from pop culture at large and incorporating them into this really high fantasy novel. Although I can't bring myself to say it's high fantasy, even though that was his intention, because I think high fantasy on some level is not accessible the way this is, and this is incredibly accessible. And I think one of the reasons it's this accessible is the reliance on American culture and American tropes. That action scene with the huge gunfight with Eddie at his side down to the last bullet, I just was riveted and could not put the book down. Ultimately, what I think makes King so successful as a novelist is the fact that he can create a story that is both simultaneously one own story and yet part of a much larger whole. He is an amazing writer, and I don't mean to say that the book's not without flaws. There's good reasons why it wouldn't be in my top 10. Not anything concrete, just it didn't strike me as amazing as other books I've read, but it is certainly a ride, and I think that my opinion of that may change as I read more of the books in the series. Overall, just like I said before the spoiler section started, read it. It was a really fun read, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading the rest of the series, and I'll see you next time.